Oh, hi! You caught me committing a major crime. Speaking of crimes, let's talk about crime fiction and the work of Greg Rucka.
Comic tropes. Comic tropes.
Hello! Welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Today, I want to talk to you about crime comics. I want to talk about a crime comic that actually debuted within the last 10 years. That book is Stumptown. Now, it features some gorgeous artwork by Matthew Southworth, and I'll talk a little bit about that as it relates to the storytelling. But specifically today, I want to look into the techniques used by writer Greg Rucka. Now, crime comics are fantastic. They've been a big part of the comic book industry all the way back to the beginning. But these days, they can sometimes be overshadowed by superhero comics. I would say that's the majority of the comics that you'll see on a shelf. But crime comics, there are some amazing examples out there, and I'm going to spend this month looking at some of the best examples. A lot of those topics are going to be voted on by my patrons, so thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. And without any further ado, let's start by diving into the techniques that writer Greg Rucka uses when he writes crime fiction. Greg Rucka is known for writing grounded, detailed, and realistic crime stories. After earning his master's in fine arts, Rucka became a novelist, writing a series of detective novels based on his character Atticus Kodiak. He broke into comics in 1998 with Whiteout, published through Oni Press, about a murder that takes place on an Antarctica research station and whose jurisdiction laws are questionable. Rucka would go on to publish his espionage series Queen and Country and, of course, the crime comic Stumptown through Oni. In the 2000s, he was hired by DC Comics, and he wrote for Batman in Detective Comics, including a backup feature on Gotham City detective Renee Montoya, who he would go on to eventually have become The Question. He also co-created the modern version of Batwoman and co-wrote Gotham Central with writer Ed Brubaker, focusing on the police in Batman City. So as you can see, while Greg Rucka has written for superheroes, including characters like Wolverine, Wonder Woman, and presumably characters whose names don't start with the letter W, he's also always known for writing a lot of crime and detective work in his stories, and he's also known for writing strong female protagonists. Let's talk about what the main character is like in Stumptown. Her name is Dex, and let's talk about what makes her work so well. In crime fiction, the most interesting detectives are smart, which Dex definitely is, but they're also full of flaws. For instance, Sherlock Holmes is a drug addict, a misogynist, and egotistical. The detectives and private eyes in pulp noir stories are often down on their luck on top of all that. Dex is an army vet who served in Iraq and Afghanistan and returns home to take care of her younger brother who has Downs. She's also a gambling addict who we learn at the beginning of the Stumptown story owes the local casino nearly $17,000. She's also unlucky in love and isn't even sure what team she plays for, flirting with all sorts of men and women she comes across. In the first arc, the native casino owner, Sue Lynn Blackbird, strong-arms Dex into finding her missing granddaughter in exchange for wiping out Dex's gambling debts. Dex is constantly on her back foot, reacting to dangerous situations she gets herself into, but she's likable because of her big mouth. It puts her in danger and gets her punched and even gets her shot, but she's funny. It's hard not to like someone that's funny, right? Stumptown is a great example of crime fiction because of the techniques it uses. The clues are always there for you to figure out. Everyone is a suspect. So it's really difficult actually for the reader to get ahead of the mystery. Rucka always stays one step ahead by placing things in difficult to understand contexts and just doling out the clues piecemeal. Let's talk about exactly how he does that. First, the story will frequently jump between characters, which can disorient you from the main plot. But even more extreme, the issues can sometimes be told non-chronologically. For instance, the first issue begins with Dex getting shot by some thugs, and then jumps back throughout the day to bring us up to speed. We can't understand how Dex got to where she is until we read the full issue and can piece it all together ourselves. An important element of any good mystery is withholding information without it being obvious. Characters give partial truths, or the information they know, but it can't tell the full story. In the first arc, Dex has to deal with people the missing granddaughter was associated with, which includes the daughter and the son of a local crime kingpin. Each of them has very specific character reasons for withholding information, whether it's due to criminal activity or existing relationships. Dex's job is to suss out the truth. Like any good detective, she has her sidekicks and sources of information. The main one is her friend, Police Detective Hoffman. That said, her friendship with Hoffman is not always an easy one. In the first arc, we learn that Hoffman's supervisor absolutely despises Dex, and it's implied it's because Dex had an affair with the supervisor's wife. Yikes. In the second volume, the situation is complicated because Dex's client is an ex-lover of Hoffman. So again, there's always a conflict that doesn't make it easy to access the full resources that the police have available to them. Dex is good at pissing people off. This sort of puts her as the constant outsider. Dex has to be creative and observant to do her job well, and she's good at it. Rucka is fantastic at writing in these small details. When Dex first goes to investigate the missing person, she notes things like the missing toiletries, an absent piece of luggage, the fact that the door shows no signs of being forced in, and the fact that the alleged victim didn't take her own car when she left. But none of this is spelled out in dialogue or narration boxes. He trusts his artist, in this case Matthew Southworth, to convey that information. People like procedurals and focusing on the details of jobs that they don't encounter in everyday life. Rucka is well known for doing heavy research to get the details right. Stumptown uses real locations and streets instead of fictionalized ones. It takes place in Portland, Oregon, and it's a very accurate one. Issue 4 of the second volume features a car chase, and if you've ever been to the city, you can tell that it matches up with the actual streets that would lead to the St. John's Bridge. Credit, of course, has to go to the artist as well for getting the details right. Other important crime fiction tropes include typical elements like an absence of evidence and bluffing with the criminal. I won't dive deep into those so that I don't spoil the mysteries within Stumptown. But even after you know the mystery is resolved, the books are worth rereading to confirm the clues were there all along. And then these books can be enjoyed on other levels, such as its dark, scratchy artwork, detailed and shadowy locations, and the evocative colors that help set the tone. There's an evolution to the artwork across each story. The first volume features some great colors by Lee Loffridge, which have pages drenched in color. Later issues feature colors by Rico Renzi, who gives more detail to individual elements within the panels, but still uses a subdued palette. Some later issues feature artist Matthew Southworth co-credited with colors because he used gray Copic markers to add depth and roundness to his characters, before the color was then laid over it. That's probably my favorite result. One of the things I really appreciate in reading a Greg Rucka story is his attention to detail. You can count on him doing a lot of research so that when you visit the police station or when you see a private investigator conducting their research, you can count on that being a very accurate real-world representation of those facts. I don't think it slows the story down. I think it adds realistic detail that helps pull you into the story. In an interview with Brian Michael Bendis, Greg Rucka talked about his work ethic. Rucka said, "It always comes down to commitment to your craft. That's the only thing you can control. You cannot control anything else. All you can control is your relationship to your work and the effort you're willing to put into it, and how willing you are to recognize that you're never going to be good enough and that you always have to get better." Rucka's stories are detail-oriented, but that doesn't mean it slows down the pace of his stories. He's got his fair share of action, and that can include both physical action, like fights or chases, as well as character interaction. He's not afraid to slow down the pace of his stories by giving his stories a beat, in comics a panel, where there's no dialogue. Characters exchange looks. It helps flavor the story to have a word-free panel, and instead of letting a reader breeze past, tends to make you take notice. In terms of his influences, Rucka has credited the Philip Marlowe stories by Raymond Chandler many times. There's similarities there. Swaths of morally compromised suspects, a hard-working main character who seems to get in over their heads regularly, a feeling that the city itself is a character, one who will chew you up and spit you out if you aren't careful. If you're already a fan of Rucka's work, or after watching this video you become a fan of his work, I definitely recommend checking out some of Raymond Chandler's crime novels, especially The Big Sleep. I think that's a great place to start. And from there, you can start to discover other pulp noir crime stories like things by Donald Westlake or Dashiell Hammett. Now, one thing that Stumptown has in common with those writers is it's been adapted into a television show. A lot of these writers have had their works adapted into TV and film, and now Stumptown has become a show on ABC. But it features a key difference that I think is worth mentioning. The biggest difference is that the show is now set on Mars in the year 2049. Okay, no, the show is still set in Portland, Oregon, and they shoot some exteriors there, but a lot of the show is filmed up in Vancouver, Washington. Dabbling for the city. It does a pretty good job, and a lot of it is very accurate. I think Kobe Smulders plays a fantastic Dex. Her home life is very similar, but there have been a few adjustments to some of the characters. For instance, Dex in the comics had Hoffman as her best friend, who happens to be a cop. Hoffman is now a black man, played by Michael Ealy, who helps her, but the relationship is now more flirtatious, and he hands off cases the cops aren't able to pursue. His supervisor is now a woman, played by Cameron Manheim. And her friend Gray, who used to be a nerdy guy that seemed to pine for Dex, is now her childhood friend who runs a bar, and he's played by Jake Johnson. Aside from that, Dex has the same family life, smart mouth, military background, and gets in over her head while solving cases. It seems to be a pretty cool procedural. Stumptown is a pretty great modern-day detective crime fiction story. Originally, the first several arcs came out several years apart, but the good news is now you can catch up and read them all at once. And now it's an ongoing title. That said, the TV show will probably surpass it pretty quickly in terms of how many stories it tells with these characters. So if you want to get in there and be one of the cool people with early street cred, now is the time to check that book out. And speaking of checking out cool things, let's take a look at what fan art came in this week. Based off of my recent episode about Lock and Key, artist Hunter Wolf created the comics key for me. You can check out more of Hunter's work on ArtStation. Isaiah Portillo created a very cool portrait of me and writes that he intends on attending the Kubert School to learn about comics. You can see more of his work on Instagram. Graphite Grappler illustrated me as a Wolverine. Hey, who's to say I don't have an adamantium-laced skeleton? Graphite Grappler also has a YouTube channel. Rowan Maguire from Ireland sent in me as the skinless boy from Harrow County. Very creative. You can see more by Rowan on Instagram. Marvel Boy used MS Paint, I think, to create this alternative look at comic tropes. Maciek Smaga drew me running around St. Tropez naked, and I've had to censor that so that YouTube doesn't demonetize me. Maciek has more art on Facebook. Finally, Matt sent in this hilarious comic featuring indie comic character Grendel waiting for his turn. Very funny, Matt. I laughed out loud at this one. If you would like to have some fan art included in this channel, I'm always happy to share that. Just make sure it has something to do with comic tropes and send it into this email address, comictropes@gmail.com. I will include it, and then I will pick a winner to get a Gachapon prize. These come out of the Gachapon machine that was donated by Lunarshine Store, so let's spin the wheel and take a look at who wins. Number 7. It's going to be number 7, that artist. And let's take a look at what you won for a Gachapon prize. Folks, I appreciate you watching this. I really think that Stumptown is totally worth checking out. And it's fun. Maybe you've already checked out the TV show. All right. This Gachapon prize is Hellboy himself. So this is Hellboy. I will collect the contact information for the winner, the art winner, and I'll send that out to you. I do take a long time to mail these things out, just so you guys know. I don't mail them out every week. I wait until I've got a big backlog of these. So if you're still waiting for your prize, all I can say is I apologize that it takes me so long. I tend to stay pretty busy, so I don't have tons of time to hit the post office. I just got past Inktober. I was live streaming every single day on this channel. That took up a lot of time. Now I've committed to drawing a page for a friend's comic. That will come out very, very soon, so I'll be sure to let you all know it. And I acted in a short film locally. That debuted. I'll have the link to that movie in the video description for this week if you're curious. So I've been taking on sort of extra projects on top of my full-time job and Comic Tropes. It means that sometimes things like mailing these Gachapon prizes out kind of does take a back seat. But I promise I do get them out. Just be patient and you'll get something free. And I'll be getting new Gachapon prizes pretty soon. I'm less than a month from heading out to Japan. And I'm going to do something special for the channel there. I will try to create some extra video content, going to some of the local comic book stores, things like that, showing you a little bit of what that's about. And I have already confirmed a booking for YouTube has a studio in Tokyo, and I've got that reserved. I'm going to be recording a very special episode of the show there. I'm definitely looking forward to that. So there's some exciting things coming up this month. If you're not already a supporter on Patreon, I kind of got that word out. The folks last month got to vote on which horror comics I would cover, and this month they're getting to vote on what crime comics I'll cover. Next month, I'll have a smattering of everything. 2 theme months in a row is, I know, pretty intense, but there was just a lot of horror and crime stuff that I've been wanting to cover, and I'm letting my patrons help choose which titles will be selected. And it's not too late to vote on that, so feel free to jump in and have your 2 cents heard. All right, folks, I appreciate you watching. Next week is definitely something cool, as voted on by the patrons. I think it's something that there's a lot of interest in. Until I see you then, keep reading comics.